Hello and welcome back to another episode of Just a Moment. We've talked already about our 4 pillars, how we address poverty. Today we want to explore how we mobilize our network across the region to do just that. Today our guests are UWBA Chief Advancement Officer Christopher Berini and joining us virtually, UWBA board member and founding attorney at Branch Law Group, Michelle Branch. Christopher, Michelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jason. It's great to be here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Christopher, to get us started, I wonder if you can give us a brief history of how our network kind of developed and a snapshot of what that looks like today.
Yeah, well, I mean, as United Way Bay Area, we come from the United Way world, and United Way was founded on the idea that we can't solve big social problems on our own. So we have to do that together. We have to come together and mobilize. So in the Bay Area, we've been here for 100 years, building relationships that are essential to the way we get our work done, and mobilizing and coordinating and convening those partners and leveraging those relationships is really how we drive impact.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Michelle? What do you think?
In terms of our network and in terms of mobilizing, we're ready to meet people where they are. And we'd like to talk about our framework as give, advocate, and volunteer. And so in terms of volunteering, oftentimes that's the first contact that people or individuals or groups will have with United Way Bay Area to learn more about our programs and really have hands-on activities and involvement. And then we also have opportunities for advocacy days where we work with elected officials, go to our state capitol to mobilize and advocate for specific issues around healthcare, tax reform, issues that are really important to our community members. And then also there's the giving aspect, which is the financial contribution. So there are different ways in which people can engage throughout the network.
Right.
Yeah, and I think Michelle's on an important point about the different ways we mobilize and engage and partner. We have to have all those different ways. Poverty, the issue we're most focused on now, is a incredibly complex problem. And so it requires all those different approaches and all those different entry points for folks to connect with us and share in the work.
Yeah. And, what do you think it is about the way that we mobilize and utilize our network that makes us unique in this particular space, in this advocacy work that we're doing?
Well, in advocacy work specifically, I might defer to our policy chair, Michelle, but I think what makes United Way Bay Area most unique is that we have not just this local network that we built up over 100 years, but also a national and international network of other United Ways operating in a similar way, leveraging those best practices, that expertise, applying it as appropriate to our local region is really one of the things that makes us most unique. And even here within the Bay Area, our focus across multiple counties and most of the Bay Area makes us well positioned to coordinate between agencies and deliver at that regional level.
One of the things that we've talked about is our advocacy days when we might go to the U.S. Capitol or we'll go to Sacramento and work together. So we'll work together across the state. We have United Ways of California who helps to advise us, and we work with different United Ways throughout the state of California on issues where we have commonality. Housing is one of those issues, right? Like California is a state that's severely impacted by lack of housing and housing infrastructure. And so how can we come together to find solutions that work for all of us that are not just, they're local, but we also need regional and statewide solutions as well to be able to work together. And I think one of the things that informs our advocacy really well is we're working with people from different foundations, nonprofits. We're also working with people who have lived experiences with poverty, lived experiences with housing insecurity, and not only lived experience generally, but also with some of our programs as well. So one of the nice things that we can do is bring a vast array of people together when we're talking with our elected officials and others who can actually help to make change, to hear specifically what those experiences have been and to learn from people who are experiencing housing insecurity, for example, and help us learn more and also inform our electeds so that we can come up with better solutions that work for everybody. They're not solutions that are kind of just in the ether. So we have policy expertise, and we also have, the lived experience as well that we bring to the table.
And if I can just build on that for a second with a very concrete example, I have to tell you, this year was the first year I was able to go to Sacramento with the policy team and with our ambassadors, those folks with lived experience that Michelle's speaking about, and to walk into the Office of Elected Officials and meeting with their representatives and talking about some of the key policies that are on our agenda, but having that be informed by direct statements from folks who are impacted by those issues, who have received and benefited from our services, and who help continue to shape our services was the most powerful thing in my time in this organization so far. And I think it really is an important distinguishing factor in the way that we operate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are there other ways that we partner with elected officials, both locally and statewide?
Certainly elected officials may sponsor legislation. And one of the things that we can do is look at our network and see, are there other nonprofits, other entities, groups that would be impacted or interested in that legislation. And then we can help to actually bring together those groups, help to write a letter, help to advocate in that way. So yeah, there are ways that we can mobilize and activate that way. So oftentimes elected officials will ask us, who else is interested in this issue? What do we know about it? And then we can, find those different groups and work together. So that's probably the best way I would say we would partner with electeds, is to help them get the informational resources and also community resources that they might not necessarily be aware of, but really want access to. So we can be a gateway to that.
And I might just add there too, that one of the things we're able to bring to the conversation when speaking to elected officials that I believe they find useful, we've heard from them that they find useful, is the data that we have because of the region we work in and the way that we operate, particularly with 211, the helpline that we operate and other United Ways operate in other parts of the country, allows us not just to provide that frontline service and connection for folks to resources who are needing support, but also we have all the information gathered from those calls that we use in aggregate, depersonalized, so that we can come to a county representative or a city representative and say, here's the information that we have to support this position you may already agree with, or that maybe you don't agree with, and here's why we're making the case that you support the position we have on this policy, because here's what we can show you about how folks in your district or your area are being impacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Michelle, what has caused us to shift in the way that we use our network to address poverty?
So the way that we're looking at and thinking about poverty has changed. And we've started to look at the root causes of poverty and understand that there are structural barriers that prevent people from making the economic progress that they would need. Housing is a really good example of that, unfortunately. And so one of the areas that United Way Bay Area has focused on has been housing justice, and we have specific housing justice initiatives, and really trying to lift up that perspective of housing justice. So, when we have our public policy meetings and advocacy meetings, we are informed by housing advocates, which is incredibly helpful for us to understand, what the core issues are. And we've identified some of them. And I understand that there is another interview segment where United Way Bay Area talks about the housing justice initiatives, but one that I'll lift up is exclusionary zoning, which is zoning essentially that oftentimes prevents families from moving into certain neighborhoods, based on, potentially there can only be single family homes as opposed to apartment complexes being built, those kinds of things. So we could make more room for all. And the question is, how do we do that? But zoning practices oftentimes prevent building the housing that's necessary. So we're looking into, how can we disrupt some of these structural barriers?
Sure.
And just quickly building on what Michelle just said, as I was listening to you, Michelle, it made me think, one of the things that's important about mobilizing, especially right now for United Way Bay Area, is that thankfully many people are much more aware of systemic barriers. Mm-hmm. And mobilizing these days really means charging up and energizing and informing people to break down those systemic barriers. We can't mobilize if people are hindered from moving things forward by those systemic and societal barriers.
True. And as a part of our network, we also have corporate partners, and we get corporations that come to us because they also want to learn. They also want that education and that data that we have, right? Christopher, how do our corporate entities, our corporate partners fit into our network?
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of maybe starting from the place of, well, let me touch on history and then come back to what you're saying about and what we've been talking about around systemic barriers is, for 100 years, we've had relationships largely from the beginning with the corporate sector in particular, continue to operate across sectors, but corporate and the foundation sector and philanthropists, individual donors have always been an important part of our mix. So as we go on our own journey of better understanding systemic barriers and the root causes of poverty that Michelle was talking about, bringing folks along on that journey, like we talk about, is critical. And I think many, if not all of our partners are very much on board to go on that journey with us, for us to learn from each other, and for us to interact with their employees, their employee resource groups, to have those conversations, to mobilize them to join us in volunteering, to certainly, inspire them to donate if they're able to, and for those that have the time and inclination to join in this advocacy work we've been talking about.
Yeah. One of the things that I kind of want to bring it back to as we get ready to close here is, at the end of the day, the purpose of our network, what we're trying to do is find solutions that help us dismantle poverty and break down those barriers that we were talking about. I wonder, I think, Christopher, you mentioned, you might have mentioned 211 as a specific example that is actually a network on its own that we operate. And Michelle, feel free to jump in here as well. But Christopher, do you have some specific examples maybe of how 211 operates in practice to really address poverty for Bay Area residents?
Yeah, I think one of the storms are a great example from this past year, and there was flooding and unexpected storm surge. One of the counties in which we operated came to us specifically and asked us to be the hub for that county in terms of responding. So that required activating the network of supports that we already had, but also in some cases identifying new supports, being the place, the receiving line for people who were calling and asking for help, and then making sure those folks were connected to the right organization based on whatever their need might be, whether it was temporary shelter or food or some other kind of assistance. And being there and being that hub is essential. And then also being able to report back to the county or whoever our partner is on what we're seeing and how the response is going.
Christopher, what are some other ways that the United Way Bay Area mobilizes individuals to get involved?
Well, we talked about volunteers already, but one of the most important types of volunteers that we have is our volunteer leadership. And that over the last few years in particular has expanded significantly. Our board of directors is larger, representing broader perspectives and experiences. And our advisory council has grown significantly as well. And in that place, we have fellow nonprofit leaders, we have corporate leaders, we have folks that we talked about earlier with lived experience with our programs, our ambassadors, and all those various, and just other philanthropists, other donors who've supported our work. Having all those perspectives in the same room and the different aspects of poverty that they understand is really crucial for us doing our work effectively. And like we talked about, this is foundational. Bringing people together is how we do the work, and mobilizing the community and our partners and doing this work together. We've become more inclusive about what together means over the decades, so that mobilization becomes even more powerful.
Yeah. And it takes everyone. This work takes all of us. Michelle, Christopher, thank you again for joining us. And thank you for watching. For more information about how you can get involved, visit us online at www.uwba.org and follow us on social media at UWBA Area. Make sure you use the hashtag #TheWorkUWBA. We'll see you next time.